You think modern recipes are smarter than what your great-grandparents made? Think again. Depression-era cooks mastered the art of turning almost nothing into deeply satisfying meals that kept families alive and together. Let's dig into 60 Depression-era meals we stupidly forgot and now desperately need. Few dishes better capture the ingenuity of Depression-era cooks than bologna and rice casserole, an inventive marriage of modest ingredients that was both filling and budget-friendly. Rice was cheap, available nearly everywhere, and could stretch even the most limited pantries, while bologna, well, let's just say it wasn't winning culinary awards, but it certainly scored high marks for affordability and accessibility. Interestingly, the casserole's popularity was boosted by the era's government relief programs, which often provided surplus bologna to struggling families. Ever-resourceful home cooks quickly realized the processed meat's potential, combining thin slices or chopped bits with rice, canned tomatoes, and occasionally leftover vegetables lurking in their ice boxes, expertly reducing waste and maximizing resources. Food historians point out that clever homemakers might dress up this casserole by layering in spices or sneaking in leftover cheese, a creative touch born purely from necessity. A running joke at dinner tables was that bologna and rice casserole was the great equalizer. Since wealthy or poor, no one was immune from the economic pinch, and apparently, bologna didn't discriminate either. Applesauce bread is essentially what you think it is. This super cozy, sweet-smelling loaf of bread works wonders, and it makes your entire kitchen feel like an advertisement for autumn, but right in the middle of April. It's soft, really moist, and spiced just right so that it's not really overwhelming, but you can definitely pick up on those cinnamon and nutmeg notes. A bit of clove here and there also does wonders for the dish. The applesauce is something that keeps it really tender without needing a lot of butter or soil, and this is, to be honest, most of the point. It was a go-to during the 30s and 40s, especially in wartime kitchens where fat and eggs were pretty much rationed. Applesauce was really cheap. It was something that was easy to get at home, it doubled as a sweetener and a binder, and it ended up being perfect for cakes, breads, and cookies. Flavor-wise, it's something that you could call a mixture of banana bread and spice cake, so it's not too sugary, but it feels rich enough that you can definitely call it a dessert. Some of the best things in life came from improv, and hobo stew is pretty much the exact same. Hobo stew is pretty much a dish that was made out of sheer necessity. It doesn't have a set-in-stone recipe or any strict guidelines to follow. With this recipe, all you really need to do is essentially just take whatever vegetables and meat scraps you have, or just whatever you have in your pantry, and keep it in one pot. This essentially stews, and the end result is usually a complete wild card. Not only is this a good way to make use of everything in your house, ensuring nothing goes to waste, but it's also a pretty handy way of checking out your cooking skills. A lot of the reason dishes like these were even good in the first place is because people had an intuitive understanding of what flavors would work, how much of something to add, how long to let something stay on the stove, and that's just something you develop from trial and error, so get to experimenting instead of ordering. Crown roast of lamb is an exquisite dish often reserved for special occasions and holiday feasts. This majestic preparation involves arranging racks of lamb into a circular shape that resembles a crown, with ribs pointing skyward. It's seasoned with a mix of rosemary, garlic, and thyme, both in the marinade and as a rub applied before roasting. To enhance its flavor and retain moisture, the crown center is typically filled with a stuffing composed of breadcrumbs, minced garlic, herbs, and occasionally dried fruits like apricots or cranberries. The lamb is roasted until it achieves a tender texture and a beautifully browned exterior. Precision in tying the racks together ensures the roast cooks evenly. To perfect its presentation, chefs often cover the tips of the ribs with foil during roasting to prevent charring. This dish not only dazzles as a culinary delight, but also stands as a festive centerpiece, symbolizing celebration and feasting. Cowboy stew is a robust concoction traditionally associated with the outdoor cooking of American cattle herders. This dish typically includes a base of ground beef or other meat, combined with a hearty blend of potatoes, onions, beans, corn, and tomatoes, stewed in a richly seasoned broth. The stew's origins are rooted in the practical needs of cowboys during cattle drives across the American West, requiring meals that could be cooked in a single pot over an open fire. Cowboy stew's durability and popularity among outdoor workers underscore its role in the folklore of the American frontier. The recipe's evolution over time incorporated local and available ingredients, showcasing the stew's flexibility and the improvisational skills of those who made it. Fatback. Just the name sounds delicious, right? Wrong. Fatback is basically just a slab of pure pig fat. This cut of pork was often used to flavor dishes or rendered into lard for cooking. In times of scarcity, fatback was a valuable ingredient because it added flavor and richness to otherwise bland meals. You could fry it up to make crispy bits or use the rendered fat for cooking just about anything. Fatback is the unsung hero of many Southern dishes, providing that extra bit of flavor that makes everything taste better. However, in today's world of lean meats and health-conscious eating, fatback hasn't quite kept up. It's the kind of thing that makes dietitians shudder, but still holds a nostalgic place in the hearts of many. While it's not as popular as it once was, fatback remains a key ingredient in traditional Southern cooking, and for good reason, it's delicious. Boiled salt pork and beans are pretty much the same deal. Now, beans just happen to be man's best friend when the going gets rough. You have so many different kinds of them, and you can have twice as many different kinds of food with them. Stews, soups, or something as economical as this. Boiled salt pork and beans actually stems from the Depression era, and it was a way to stretch out meat rations when they were running low, which was usually always. This is more beans than pork, I'll admit, but either way, it's a protein power punch that you don't want to be missing from your diet. Boiled salt pork and beans are also some of the easiest kinds of plates of food you can make. You don't really need to do anything besides just take the salt pork and boil it, along with the beans, adding whatever seasonings, aromatics, and herbs you prefer. That's pretty much how a lot of people used it back then anyway, although we have the benefit of choosing much better cuts of meat than they did. Even with a dish like this, in the Depression era, people would essentially just wait until the butcher's shops were discarding their most unwanted parts of the animal, and that's what they would buy for as cheap of a price as they could bargain for. It was usually something most shops were happy to let go of for some chump change. But nowadays, even that's like half your rent. Tallow fried potatoes are the OG French fries. They're insanely flavorful. They have that beautiful golden sheen to them, and they're about as crispy as you would want the perfect batch of French fries to be. A lot of that color, vividness, and flavor comes from the fact that they're fried in rendered beef fat instead of vegetable oil. Now, back in the day, and I mean way before the 80s, fast food joints like McDonald's were actually using beef tallow in their fries as well. That was a big part of what gave them that original iconic flavor. Tallow helps potatoes achieve a savory flavor that they would never be able to get to on their own. Plus, this just isn't there today with the modern oils we have. The best part really was the exterior, because a simple first bite was about as close to nirvana as you could get. If you were eating these when you were borderline starving, then you were pretty much about to have the best food experience of your life. Tallow was the go-to frying fat for a lot of American diners and fast food kitchens, and it's just not hard to see why. And then, you ever have leftovers but you don't want to make what you had last night? Back in a time when store-bought desserts were off-limits for most American households, resourceful homemakers turned their attention to economical recipes, ingeniously crafting sweets from ingredients hiding in their pantry. Among these inventive treats was the comforting creamy delight known as baked rice custard. This humble dish showcased Depression-era creativity born from necessity, transforming leftover rice, often deemed too dry for a second act, into a silky, gently sweetened custard baked to golden perfection. Using accessible pantry staples like milk, sugar, eggs, and rice, cooks discovered an affordable and satisfying dessert that cleverly embodied the practice of reducing waste and maximizing resources. An interesting historical nugget is that rice-based desserts date back centuries, originally popularized in Europe before becoming an American comfort food mainstay during hard times. Homemakers humorously referred to it as the dessert that rescued rice from eternal exile, making yesterday's leftovers today's culinary star. During the Depression, milk and eggs, though somewhat scarce, were prioritized for nutrition, turning this custard into more than just a sweet treat, but an essential source of protein and calcium. Galantine of chicken is a testament to the elaborate artistry of classical French cuisine, popularized in the 17th century. It involves a meticulous process where a whole chicken is deboned and stuffed with a seasoned mix of ground meat, fats, and spices, including luxurious touches like pistachios and truffles. The chicken is then encased back within its skin, poached in a flavorful stock and set to cool, often in the gelatin-rich cooking liquid, to form a jelly. Decorated with artistic slices of vegetables, herbs, or edible flowers and coated in a glistening aspic, galantine is served cold, making it a striking centerpiece for buffets and banquets. This dish not only showcases the culinary craftsmanship of detailed butchery and seasoning, but also the aesthetic presentation. Introduced during the 1970s in the American broccoli casserole, became a beloved dish that cleverly combined the need for convenience with the desire for flavorful meals. This casserole mixes chopped cooked ham and broccoli with a rich cheese sauce, often made creamier with the addition of a condensed soup, which is then topped with breadcrumbs or crushed crackers for texture and baked until golden. This dish exemplifies the era's ingenuity in using readily available, often pre-processed ingredients to create a dish that could serve as a one-pot meal, reducing both preparation time and cleanup. It became particularly favored for its versatility, allowing variations such as substituting chicken for ham or adding different vegetables, thus catering to a range of palates and pantry contents. The casserole's popularity surged as it appeared in magazine spreads and cooking shows, often recommended for its ability to double as a dish suitable for both weeknight family dinners and social gatherings. Cracklins, on the other hand, I can get behind. They're basically pork rinds, but with a fancy name. Finally, a normal, delicious meal that doesn't make your nose wrinkle. Cracklins were essentially the popcorn of the pork world. These crispy, crunchy bits were made from frying pieces of pork fat and skin until they puff up and become irresistible little nuggets. In the days when every part of the pig was used, cracklins were a way to make a snack out of what would otherwise be discarded. But here's the catch. These didn't really have a lot of benefits when you ate them. Yeah, nothing really screams healthy about eating deep-fried pieces of pork. Think of them as the porky cousin of potato chips. These days, you're more likely to find them in specialty southern stores than on your local supermarket shelf. Cracklins may not be the healthiest choice, but they're a tasty reminder of a time when people knew how to make the most of what they had. When meat became a luxury during the Great Depression, resourceful home cooks discovered inventive ways to transform pantry staples into flavorful, satisfying meals. One delicious example being macaroni and tomatoes. Often affectionately nicknamed poor man's spaghetti, this modest dish featured canned tomatoes combined with budget-friendly macaroni noodles, exemplifying affordability and accessibility at their best. Cleverly, families frequently repurposed leftover stewed tomatoes or sauce from previous meals, effectively reducing waste and maximizing resources without sacrificing taste or nutrition. An interesting historical tidbit: macaroni was among the first affordable processed foods readily available nationwide, making this pairing an accessible solution for struggling households. Even though macaroni and tomatoes relied on just two humble ingredients, cooks creatively enhanced flavor with whatever herbs they had growing outside: oregano, parsley, or even wild chives. Proving creativity born from necessity often produced tastier results than gourmet recipes. And speaking of creativity, Depression-era homemakers occasionally added leftover bacon drippings or grated hard cheese, humorously transforming simple pasta into something fancy enough to impress neighbors. I think the most intimate food experience for anyone from the South is easily just hominy grits. Like, these are definitely a Southern ride or die as far as breakfast is considered. Creamy, loaded with corn and customizable in about 1,000 different ways, there's a lot that hominy grits bring to the table that other dishes just don't seem to compare to. And that too on a budget. They're made from hominy, which is essentially just dried corn that's been treated with an alkaline solution and then grounded into coarse grits. And when cooked slowly with water, milk, and broth, they actually turn into this incredibly thick, fantastic porridge that's worth its weight in gold. What makes hominy grits really stand out is their sheer versatility, though. I mean, the possibilities are quite literally endless. You can go the savory route or the super sweet route, and all you have to do is just add a bit more of whatever spices, seasonings, and herbs you're working with. Hominy grits are so effective largely because they were a Native American creation. The tribes were making hominy a long time before any Europeans set foot on American soil, and they helped to popularize the tradition, which is how it turned into a go-to for Southern kitchens by the 19th century. Cabbage and corned beef hash have a really practical history in American food culture. It's something that came about as a humble wartime dish whose purpose was to turn any leftovers into something that could really get people seated at the table, but it also just shows you how resourceful people were. Corned beef hash was pretty recent, considering it made its name during World War I and World War II, right when it was introduced into the United States. The canned version, like the Hormel's cans you've probably seen lining up grocery store marts, is actually something that was the lifeblood of many people back then. Corned beef hash was an insane step forward because it meant that rationed, affordable, preserved meat was now more accessible than ever. And that only meant that things like cabbage, which were year-round vegetables, were that much more in demand as side items, ingredients, and toppings. Corned beef hash was a way for people to have cheap calories and protein, and it makes sense too, because the thing was designed for maximum efficiency, so it could be used by soldiers during wartime. Tornados Rossini is an indulgent reflection of haute cuisine, named after the gourmet aficionado and renowned composer Gioacchino Rossini. Crafted by the legendary chef Auguste Escoffier in Paris, this dish features a medallion of beef tenderloin, cooked in butter and crowned with a slice of sumptuous foie gras. Resting on a crouton that soaks up the juices, the Tornados is lavished with a rich Madeira demi-glace that's infused with truffles and finished with butter, then garnished with fresh truffle slices. The preparation of this dish demands precision. The beef tenderloin seared to perfection, the foie gras just melting, and the sauce richly coating each component. Tornados Rossini not only showcases the luxury of its ingredients, but also the skill in combining them to deliver a dish that is as opulent in taste as it is in history. Corn soufflé presents a refined twist on traditional American ingredients, combining the native sweetness of corn with the airy texture of a classic French soufflé. Introduced into American kitchens primarily in the early 20th century, this dish features corn kernels blended with a mixture of milk, butter, and egg yolks, with stiffly beaten egg whites folded in to give it a light, fluffy consistency. The soufflé is then baked until it rises and turns golden, offering a delicate balance of flavor and texture. The dish highlights the versatility of corn, a staple American crop, by showcasing it in a form that contrasts dramatically with its usual preparations. This adaptation not only speaks to the culinary creativity of the time, but also to the integration of European techniques with American ingredients. Faced with pantry shelves lined mostly by oats and root vegetables, cooks during the Great Depression found surprisingly innovative ways to keep meals affordable and accessible without sacrificing taste. Among these humble innovations was savory oatmeal with onions, a dish that swapped the sweet comfort typically associated with oats for a robust, flavorful alternative. Since oatmeal was inexpensive, readily available, and shelf-stable, adding onions was a practical choice driven by creativity born from necessity. Housewives sautéed sliced onions, sometimes incorporating bits of leftover meat drippings or bacon fat saved carefully from previous meals, proving once again that reducing waste and maximizing resources was central to Depression-era cooking. Interestingly, historical cookbooks from the 1930s describe oatmeal as versatile enough for any meal, not just breakfast, highlighting how people cleverly adapted common ingredients into uncommon dishes. A popular Depression-era saying humorously advised hesitant eaters, "If onions can't fix your oatmeal, nothing can." And yet, despite its unusual combination, the dish worked surprisingly well. Caramelized onions provided a savory depth that transformed oats from plain porridge into an unexpectedly hearty, satisfying dinner. Vinegar pie for breakfast is something that really just doesn't even sound like a real meal. It honestly sounds like some kind of prank, but no. This is a very real dish, and it actually works in more ways than one. For starters, this doesn't really taste the way you think it would. I know you're imagining some really bitter, acidic notes from the vinegar, but the initial flavor beets are sweet tart, and they give off a very custardy vibe. It's a bit like a lemon chess pie, but just made with your typical pantry staples instead this time. The vinegar is the star of the show, as it should be, and it cuts through almost every other flavor present in the pie, but not to the point where you would think all you can taste here is just vinegar. It's rich. It has this tangy brightness that actually is very stimulating for your taste buds, and if you pair it up with some hot coffee, then it works as well as Bruno Mars does with Anderson .Paak. Vinegar pie is something that strangely, despite being a pretty innovative and flavorful hit, is something that would be called a desperation pie because it's something that was made mostly by the women of the South and the Midwest living in rural populations. We've talked a lot about butcher shops and what kind of cuts of meat they would usually throw away. So one of those was the liver, and one of the best ways to use it was to make a liver loaf out of it. People would genuinely do this. It would help a lot because livers were believed to not only be very dense in their protein content, but also really good for building blood and increasing your overall bone health. Livers were something that a lot of people back then were accustomed to eating as well, even though the metallic and iron-rich taste doesn't perform too well in today's climate. We have liver fans, but I'm just not sure how many of them would sustainably eat it every week. Either way, liver loaf was something that was more loaf and less liver, because even if the meat was one of the cheapest livers you could find, it still did need to be stretched out badly. It was good to have this with bread to make it more palatable, though. Lamb shanks epitomize the rich flavors and tender textures celebrated in Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cuisines. Prized for their gelatin-rich connective tissue, lamb shanks transform through slow cooking into melt-in-your-mouth tenderness. The preparation starts with searing the shanks to a golden brown, locking in flavors through caramelization, then braising them slowly in a mix of wine, stock, and aromatics like onions, carrots, and celery, enhanced with herbs such as rosemary and thyme. This method not only tenderizes the meat, but also infuses it with a robust blend of flavors. Typically, the dish is finished with a sprinkle of gremolata, adding a fresh burst of lemon, garlic, and parsley that cuts through the richness. The braised liquid serves as a deeply flavored sauce, reduced to intensify its taste, complementing the richness of the lamb with a perfect balance of flavors. Cabbage rolls trace their roots to Eastern European cuisines, brought to the United States by immigrant communities. This dish involves steamed cabbage leaves wrapped around a filling of mixed ground meats, rice, and herbs, then baked in a tomato-based sauce. Each component, from the soft cabbage exterior to the rich, flavorful filling, plays a pivotal role in crafting a dish that is both filling and balanced. Introduced to American tables by the early 20th century, cabbage rolls became a meaningful dish among families, often prepared for large gatherings and special events due to their somewhat labor-intensive preparation. The recipe's ability to be made in large batches and stored for later use made it practical for both festive occasions and efficient home cooking, bridging the gap between tradition and convenience in the American culinary repertoire. Tripe is the edible stomach lining of cows, and it's one of those ingredients that makes you go, "Really?" But in many cultures, tripe was a beloved dish, often cooked in soups and stews. Here's the thing. These poverty foods weren't just about using the cheapest ingredients available. They were about resourcefulness and respecting the entire animal. People found ways to use every part, from the meat to the organs and even the stomach lining, turning what others might discard into nourishing meals. Now, as for tripe, it has a unique texture that's chewy but tender, and it soaks up flavors beautifully. Back in the day, it was a cheap way to add protein to a meal, especially when times were tough. It's the kind of dish that takes some getting used to, both in terms of taste and texture. Today, tripe is more likely to be found in ethnic cuisine than on the average American dinner table. It's one of those foods that hasn't quite stood the test of time, but it still has a loyal following among those who appreciate its unique qualities. During an era when store-bought meals were rare luxuries and wasting food was unthinkable, resourceful cooks relied heavily on their gardens, pantries, and plenty of improvisation. It was precisely under these circumstances that biscuits topped with tomato gravy became a beloved staple in Depression-era households. The dish was ingenious, showcasing creativity born from necessity. Leftover tomatoes, often bruised or overripe, simmered down slowly into a savory, thickened gravy, perfectly illustrating how reducing waste and maximizing resources became a domestic art form. Affordability and accessibility played pivotal roles too, as biscuits required only a handful of pantry ingredients like flour, shortening, and milk. Interestingly, tomato gravy was especially popular in southern regions, not only because tomatoes thrived there, but also because folks humorously declared, "When meat's missing from your gravy, tomatoes step right in." In fact, many Depression-era families fondly recall tomato gravy as their saving grace, turning otherwise plain, dry biscuits into satisfying meals without breaking their limited budgets. Let's talk cracklin' cornbread. This is the cornbread that absolutely doesn't mess around. Like, this is the supersonic of cornbread. This is that rugged, crispy-edged cousin of your typical cornbread muffin, and it brings with it all the rustic charm that cornbread is always known for. Cracklin' cornbread has always come from the innovative kitchens of the working class, and this is especially true in the South, where using anything less than all of the hog was considered culinary blasphemy. Wasting fat? You may as well hang up your butcher knife. It was about no waste, and cracklins were a prime example of why that mentality worked. These were gold, and stirring them into cornbread only made them shine brighter. It made the bread a lot more filling and gave it extra protein, and you needed that because if you were coming back from a day of shoveling mud, then you definitely needed something for those muscles. It was a proper lunch though, and it was even better with some fresh greens on the side. Cracklin' cornbread is something that pretty much has faded into the background nowadays, but it was the perfect kind of thing for when you had nothing but a skillet, an empty stomach, and a lot of grit and determination to make something worth eating. It's a 10 out of 10 for a lot of Southerners, and nothing's really changing that. Corn Dodgers weren't always the Super Bowl phenomena you know them to be today. Back in the day, they were actually one of the few ways where families could eat and still be full. Corn Dodgers basically involve corn cakes that are either fried or baked and then served as a main dish. But when people had any kind of meat or potatoes, just anything at all that was bulkier and heavier to serve it with, they would almost always serve it as a side dish. Still, Corn Dodgers were essential to getting by the day back then, and they're just as important now. Making these at home is as easy as it gets as well, because once you have the mixture for a corn cake ready, which is a really simple process involving like 3 steps max, all you need to do is shape them into form and get to frying. These make for such a cheap and affordable midday snack, and they're the perfect thing to come back to from work. Best part? You can prepare meals and make enough corn cake batter and just freeze it, so you don't even have to deal with the entire process when you get back home tired from work. Sole meunière is an exemplary dish that highlights the inherent flavors of its primary ingredient through a simple yet precise preparation method. This dish involves a sole fillet, lightly dusted with flour, then pan-fried in butter to a perfect golden brown. After cooking, the fillet is enhanced with a sauce of the pan's browned butter, fresh lemon juice, and chopped parsley, drizzled over the fish to amplify its delicate, sweet taste. The freshness and quality of the sole are crucial. Ideally, the fish is prepared soon after being caught, underscoring the importance of ingredient freshness in French culinary arts. The preparation focuses on preserving the fish's natural flavors, complemented subtly by the nutty browned butter and the bright lemon juice. Choosing sole, a flatfish valued for its fine texture and mild flavor, is vital as it cooks quickly and uniformly, making sole meunière a revered dish for its elegant simplicity. Introduced during the late 1980s as American interest in Asian cuisine surged, pineapple ginger chicken stir-fry represents a fusion that captures the essence of both American and Asian tastes. This dish combines juicy, sautéed chicken pieces with sharp ginger and sweet pineapple, delivering a dish that bursts with contrasting flavors. The addition of bell peppers and onions adds a crunchy texture, enhancing the overall sensory experience. The use of ginger, not only for its flavor but also for its reputed health benefits, coincided with a growing American fascination with healthier eating options. It exemplifies how global ingredients were becoming more accessible in local supermarkets, enabling home cooks to explore international recipes with ease. Okay, if you have a light stomach, this next one's not for you. Chicken feet. You heard that right? Now, we're getting into some real survival food territory. Chicken feet might sound like a strange choice for a meal, but in many cultures, they're considered a delicacy. These little feet are often used to make rich, flavorful broths and soups. The high collagen content gives the broth a silky texture that's perfect for sipping on a cold day. However, chicken feet aren't exactly the most popular menu item in the West, or at least anymore. They were big back when people had to eat whatever they could find, like the tough days of the Great Depression. But in today's modern world, chicken feet are a big no thank you. They're a bit bony and can be a challenge to eat, which might be why they haven't caught on like, say, chicken wings. But for those in the know, they're a tasty, nutrient-rich part of the chicken that's worth trying at least once. Just don't expect to see them in your local fast food chain anytime soon. Long before pancakes became a diner staple, Depression-era families turned to Johnny Cakes, a humble cornmeal-based flatbread, as a trusted source of inexpensive nourishment. Originally introduced by early American settlers, Johnny Cakes saw a resurgence during the Depression, becoming popular again due to their affordability and accessibility. Made from little more than cornmeal, salt, and water or milk, this simple batter transformed into golden, crispy patties that creatively replaced costly ingredients like wheat flour or eggs. Resourceful home cooks often pan-fried Johnny Cakes in leftover bacon grease or saved drippings from other meals, cleverly reducing waste and maximizing resources. Families got creative, too. Some would sweeten these cakes slightly with molasses or honey, while others spiced them up with savory leftovers, stretching a modest meal into something memorable. Food historians share an amusing anecdote. Because cornmeal was abundant and dirt cheap, some folks humorously called Johnny Cakes the poor man's pancake, a nickname many wore proudly, turning frugality into a source of culinary pride. Johnny Cakes with sorghum syrup are just straight-up comfort food from a time when breakfast was this familial thing everybody looked forward to, and when breakfast was entirely made from scratch. Johnny Cakes are these rustic little cornmeal pancakes that are actually very no-nonsense. None of the fluff, flair, and aesthetic charm you would normally associate with pancakes. Do you know that super cozy vibe they give off? Just not there this time. Johnny Cakes are coarse, they're not the eBay when it comes to presentation, and they actually have this very deep, toasty corn flavor that pairs almost a little too well with the smokiness and richness of sorghum syrup. You can either use this in a dipping cup or drizzle it on top, but let's be real, the dipping cup is sacred. Anything else is blasphemy. Johnny Cakes also have something of a history that goes back all the way to the indigenous peoples. They were the first ones to teach colonists how you handle cornmeal and how you should cook with it, and they were made to mirror the effects of other popular survivalist Native American food, such as pemmican. Its main function was lasting on long journeys and providing you with a boost of energy to carry on with your travels. Johnny Cakes are an incredibly economical meal and also one with extreme amounts of history. They're something that have really deep roots in Native American cooking and also a very long record of being appropriated by settlers, but one way or the other, they managed to spread all over America. Let's cut to the chase. Johnny Cakes are actually just fried cornmeal cakes, but they're flat and made on a pan fry. The difference between these and normal pancakes is that these ones actually do not have any kind of eggs, wheat, or leavening to them. And to be honest, that happens a fair amount of times. You may even have enough money to get those things, but you may just not have the energy to do groceries right now. And on days like that, who says you can't indulge in some corny history? You don't even need any kind of tools or ovens for this. All you need is a skillet or an iron griddle. Don't have baking powder? Not a problem. No yeast? Don't even worry about it. Johnny Cakes have a massive history of being used in this way by everyone in the country, stretching first from the Narragansett people of Rhode Island to you and I today. That's some history, isn't it? Cornish game hen, a petite and elegant poultry choice, typically weighs no more than 2 pounds and is ideal for serving as an individual portion, making it perfect for an upscale dinner. These hens are usually roasted whole, seasoned lightly with herbs like thyme and sage, and basted in butter to achieve a crispy golden skin while keeping the meat juicy and tender. The cavity may be stuffed with a flavorful blend of breadcrumbs, chopped vegetables, and herbs, enriching the meat during cooking. The cooking process often involves high-temperature roasting to crisp the skin, followed by a resting period before serving to ensure the meat remains moist. Serving Cornish game hens on a bed of wild rice or alongside roasted vegetables allows their delicate flavors to shine, making them a favored choice for intimate dining and special occasions due to their ideal portion size and visually appealing presentation. Bacon cheddar potato skins epitomize the fusion of simple ingredients into a beloved American bar snack. This dish, which emerged prominently in the culinary scene during the 1970s, utilizes russet potatoes known for their thick skin and starchy content, making them ideal for baking and frying. The preparation involves halving the potatoes and scooping out most of the flesh, leaving about a 1/4 inch attached to the skin. The hollowed-out skins are then baked or deep-fried until crisp and golden. Once crisped, these skins are stuffed with generous amounts of sharp cheddar cheese and crisp crumbled bacon. The cheddar is chosen for its melting properties and strong flavor, which pairs well with the smoky bacon. The filled skins are then returned to the oven until the cheese melts into a bubbly, golden pool. The dish's widespread popularity helped elevate the status of the potato from a simple side dish to a featured player in the culinary world. Scrapple was the typical everything but the oink dish. This Pennsylvania Dutch classic was made from pork scraps. Yes, that includes everything from the snout to the tail, combined with cornmeal and flour, then formed into a loaf. It is also known by the Pennsylvania Dutch name panhaas. Scrapples and panhaas were commonly considered ethnic foods of the Pennsylvania Dutch, including the Mennonites and Amish. Scraps of meat left over from butchering not otherwise used or sold were made into scrapples to avoid waste. It's like your grandma's meatloaf with a whole lot more mystery meat. Scrapple had a love it or hate it reputation. For some, it was a comfort food that reminded them of home. For others, it was a mysterious meat block they'd rather avoid. It's definitely an acquired taste, one that has not quite made it to mainstream breakfast menus. And don't even get me started on the texture. I'll leave a little to your imagination. Amid scarcity, Depression-era households leaned heavily on resourcefulness, turning even the simplest pantry staples into nutritious meals, leading directly to the rise in popularity of peanut butter bread. With just flour, peanut butter, sugar, and baking powder, home bakers concocted this hearty loaf, demonstrating remarkable creativity born from necessity. The affordability and accessibility of peanut butter played a significant role. By the 1930s, this creamy spread had transitioned from a health food for the wealthy into a cheap protein source for everyone. Interestingly, peanut butter bread required no yeast, a clever adaptation considering yeast was costly and sometimes unavailable, further reducing waste and maximizing resources. Food historians note that newspapers eagerly published this simple recipe, promoting it as the ultimate economical dish, sometimes even humorously suggesting peanut butter could single-handedly keep America strong. Many Depression survivors fondly remember slicing this loaf thinly, stretching its lifespan for days, or toasting stale slices for snacks, exemplifying an era when food waste was practically criminal. Milk toast is also pretty much exactly what you think it is. Back in the old days, it was so much more common for people to take an intentionally frugal approach to how they spent their food, and especially the kind of hacks, snacks, and dishes they would come up with. All of these ideas were centered around being able to make the most using the least amount of time, energy, and ingredients possible. Milk toast is one of the best examples of that because imagine if you tried to make the most out of some milk or some bread before it was about to hit those pearly gates and become fully expired. Yeah? You can't really figure out what to do because while you'd normally just eat them on their own separately, this time that doesn't work. You just go ahead and get milk toast ready. The best part is that it works in 3 different ways. You get a nice healthy meal that's a pretty good breakfast or an interlude meal before your next big meal. You get to save money because you're not letting anything go to waste, nor are you buying something new because these ingredients are probably on their last legs, and you get a pretty lovely dessert out of it too. What's not to like, really? It's kind of insane how convenient milk toast can really be. Peanut butter noodles might seem like a blasphemy of several degrees when you first hear about it, but keep an open mind, an empty stomach, and very, very short patience, and you'll see where people are coming from. Peanut butter noodles were essentially the go-to for most people when they were really trying to stretch things out, and they wouldn't be out in grocery marts buying packets of egg noodles or spaghetti. They would be making it at home using wheat and flour or whatever substitutes they could find. It was actually a very admirable trait back then. People were really against buying anything that could be made at home. But just noodles don't really do the trick at all, does it? It doesn't help ease that hunger. I mean, it might fill you up, but there's also the psychological aspect of eating, right? You want to feel fulfilled after a meal, and when you don't, it's pretty natural for people to keep eating. When that wasn't an option, meals like this became godsends because they were simple ways of adding flavor, any kind of flavor to dishes that were otherwise so bland, boring, and dry on their own, but had to be eaten out of necessity, because what else were you going to do? Oysters Rockefeller consists of succulent oysters on the half shell, topped with a rich buttery mixture of finely chopped herbs and breadcrumbs, then baked or broiled until golden. Originating in 1899 at Antoine's in New Orleans, one of America's historic restaurants, the dish's exact recipe remains a secret but typically includes spinach, celery, and sometimes an anise-flavored liqueur, creating a luxurious topping. The oysters are gently poached in their shells to retain moisture, then crowned with this seasoned blend. After assembling, they are broiled until the topping bubbles and browns slightly, offering a delightful contrast in textures between the creamy, tender oyster and the crisp, flavorful topping. Oysters Rockefeller is not only a treat for the palate, but also a creative celebration of local ingredients, elevating the simple oyster to a decadent culinary experience. As Mediterranean diets gained popularity in the United States for their health benefits, the layered Mediterranean dip emerged as a favored choice for its delectable mix of flavors and healthful attributes. Widely introduced in the 1990s, this dish layers hummus, tzatziki, olives, diced tomatoes, cucumbers, and feta cheese, each layer offering a unique texture and flavor. Though traditionally served with pita chips as an appetizer, this dish also serves beautifully as a substantial lunch option, especially when paired with a fresh salad or grilled vegetables. Its popularity highlights a growing American trend towards dishes that are not only nutritious, but also substantial enough to serve as a main course at casual lunches or gatherings. Clabber is soured milk that was often used in baking or eaten as a spread with sugar or fruit. Before the days of refrigeration, clabber was a common way to use up milk that had started to sour. The natural bacteria in the milk would ferment it, creating a thick, yogurt-like consistency. Clabber might sound a bit strange to modern ears, but it was a staple in many households. It's similar to yogurt or buttermilk, both of which are still popular today. However, clabber itself has fallen out of favor, likely due to its strong, tangy flavor and the modern preference for fresher dairy products. It's a reminder of a time when people made use of every bit of food they had. Hardtack, also known as ship's biscuit, is a simple, hard biscuit made from flour and water. It was a staple for sailors, soldiers, and pioneers because it had a long shelf life and was easy to transport. The downside? It was so hard that it could break your teeth if you weren't careful. While egg drop soup might evoke images of your favorite Chinese takeout, Depression-era Americans had their own inventive take on this classic dish. When times got tough and wallets got thinner, families turned to an American-style egg drop soup, cleverly crafted from simple ingredients that were affordable and accessible. Usually it was nothing more than broth, often just salted water, if we're honest, with a single precious egg carefully beaten and slowly drizzled into the simmering liquid. The egg stretched surprisingly far, forming delicate ribbons that turned plain broth into something more substantial. Food historians note that cooks, driven by creativity born from necessity, occasionally enhanced the soup by sneaking in leftover vegetables or even stale bread crusts, brilliantly reducing waste and maximizing resources. There's even an old joke from the era. Families humorously called it egg drop soup because that's exactly what they did. Drop in one egg, cross their fingers, and hope nobody noticed the absence of meat. Despite its humble composition, the warm broth offered important nutrients and protein, essential during a time when these were scarce. Oatmeal water porridge is something that sounds like it's ripped right out of a Depression-era cookbook, but that's only because it really is. It was supposed to be this zero-wastage dish that would inspire people to make the most out of the least, but it didn't really go past poor farming communities and immigrant-dense areas. What it was good for was digestion, though, because this was insanely light on the stomach, while also being really filling. So the parents that did know about this would make it obsessively for their children, and back then, kids were a lot more cool about putting up with oatmeal. It was also perfect sick person food. Plus, even if none of that applied to a person back then, they'd still probably be living paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes oatmeal helps when it's not payday yet. The point being that everyone had a run-in with this at some point, but only a select few communities made a thing out of it regularly. Oatmeal water porridge is just oats simmered in plain water too, so it makes sense why it didn't go too far in the broader world. You don't have milk, sugar, or any extras here, and it was pretty much the definition of what you would call frugal. It was used in times when dairy was really unavailable and money just wasn't there, and texture-wise, it's a lot thinner than you can imagine. All that to say, it's likely not the most appealing bite. Egg and tomato gravy over rice is still something that you can consider a proper meal, though. So, the thing about the 20th century is that people back then had a way stronger knack for gardening and farming than we ever did or maybe will. It actually helped an intense amount during times like the Depression, because it would mean you could do super simple things like this. Who needs meat, breadcrumbs, oil, and cheese when you can just boil some rice, scramble some eggs, beat some tomatoes to hell and back, get a sick paste, and have a meal? It's easy work. It doesn't take anything, and it's convenient and nearly free if you're growing your own stuff. Today, it would make for a pretty decent meal in between your dinner and breakfast, too. If you're looking for something that's refreshing, full of energy, protein, and still on the healthy side of things, then this is definitely a dish you should keep in mind. It's something that we got from the South, but it's also something you would see in cities sometimes. The idea of making gravy out of it also helped people a lot in broadening their horizons to more curry gravy-based rice dishes, which are essential for surviving through times when food is a resource and not entertainment. Veal Prince Orloff is a lavish dish that captures the essence of French-Russian culinary elegance, named after the Russian diplomat Prince Orloff, who resided in France during the 19th century. Created by the renowned French chef Urbain Dubois, it aims to impress with its sophisticated layering and flavors. The dish features slices of roasted veal loin alternated with layers of sautéed mushrooms and onions, with slices of Mornay sauce-enriched eggplant interspersed throughout. It is then crowned with more Mornay sauce, baked until bubbly and golden. This intricate preparation not only showcases the delicate flavors of veal, but also the creamy texture of the Mornay sauce, making it a dish that stands out in both taste and presentation. In times when families counted pennies and every slice of bread mattered, resourceful home cooks mastered the subtle art of turning stale loaves into irresistible treats. Take, for instance, the humble yet beloved cinnamon toast, a simple concoction of bread, butter, cinnamon, and sugar, elevated through creativity born from necessity. This Depression-era favorite thrived due to its affordability and accessibility, requiring only inexpensive staples most homes already had on hand. But here's an intriguing fact. Originally, cinnamon toast wasn't simply breakfast fare. It frequently appeared as a satisfying after-school snack or even a dessert, proving families' ingenuity in stretching resources. Frugal mothers transformed stale bread, usually destined for the birds, by crisping it in the oven, cleverly reducing waste and maximizing resources. An amusing anecdote from Depression cookbooks revealed that some creative cooks joked cinnamon and sugar were miracle workers, magically resurrecting even the toughest bread heels into sweet treats children clamored for. Though cinnamon toast might seem basic by today's gourmet standards, during the 1930s, it represented an affordable luxury, a delicious reprieve from endless soups and stews. Honestly, the fact that nobody is talking about how good molasses toast is these days is certifiably criminal behavior. I just want you to picture hot toast, and I mean real, genuine bread, not packaged, factory-made fluff, but actual freshly baked bread with deep, dark molasses. Not the generic stuff you find in marts and stores nowadays, but actual molasses. Blackstrap, bitter, smoky, sweet, and punchy. This is something brown sugar wishes it could be. Molasses toast is something that was definitely the moment back when it was popular, and those were times when you would consider sugar a luxury. Most folks tried to get it on everything they possibly could, whether that was biscuits, cornbread, hot milk, pies, or toast. The first person to put that stuff on toast hit a gold mine, and everybody copied the blueprint afterwards. The toast was absolutely the move, and butter melting with the molasses created this perfect harmony of sweetness. The bread was the perfect stage for that, and if you had it today, you'd feel like you're going back through time to a farmhouse kitchen in the 40s. You can eat this toast as it is or mix it up with some honey and nuts if you really feel like bringing out your inner chef. Some people also double down on the sugar rush by adding cinnamon and vanilla extract. We're going to start our list off with cabbage and potato hash. Honestly, it doesn't get more economical than this either, so it's a fantastic place to start. Let me tell you a little something about cabbages and potatoes before we begin dissecting this dish. So, back in the days before modern refrigeration became such a nationally accepted miracle, people actually used to worry a lot about the seasonal nature of ingredients, fruits, and vegetables. Cabbage and potatoes were arguably the sole exception to this because they can be grown and cooked pretty much throughout the entire season. Now, this was also a dish that took barely any oil or lard, and also didn't really require any kind of cooking utensils, skills, or experience. It's one of the most ideal dinners because potatoes and cabbage are always available for dirt cheap in markets, and you can make an infinite amount of combinations through them. Though some people really don't like their cabbage, something about the texture. Which side of the boat do you find yourself leaning towards? Are cabbage and potato hash something you'd try if your wallet was in bad enough shape? Or would you have a taste anyway just to see? Named in honor of the Italian opera singer Luisa Tetrazzini, chicken tetrazzini was reportedly whipped up by chef Ernest Arbogast at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco around the early 1900s. This dish, a testament to American culinary creativity, combines diced chicken and mushrooms with linguine or spaghetti in a sumptuous, creamy sauce that's often elevated with a splash of wine or sherry. Once assembled, it's liberally topped with grated Parmesan and baked until a golden crust forms on top. The addition of sherry or wine doesn't only boost the flavor, it also cuts through the cream's richness with its acidity. Typically, this dish is finished with a sprinkle of parsley or paprika to boost its visual appeal and add layers of subtle flavor. Despite its straightforward ingredients, chicken tetrazzini welcomes variations, such as almonds or pimentos, enhancing both its taste and texture. It's not just a delicious meal, but also a smart way to repurpose leftover chicken or turkey. Combining two iconic American fast foods, the cheeseburger and French fries, into one dish, the cheeseburger French fry casserole emerged as a popular meal option in the late 1980s. This casserole layers seasoned ground beef mixed with ketchup, mustard, and chopped onions, topped with a layer of French fries, sprinkled with shredded cheese, and baked until golden and bubbly. Introduced in the kitchens of inventive home cooks during the 1990s, this casserole was a response to a growing interest in recreating fast food favorites at home, offering a fun and fuss-free dinner option that delighted both kids and adults alike. Pot liquor is the savory, nutrient-rich liquid left over after boiling greens like collards, kale, or mustard greens. This flavorful broth was often sopped up with cornbread or drank straight from the bowl. It's packed with vitamins and minerals, making it a staple in many Southern households. In a world obsessed with bone broth and kale smoothies, you'd think pot liquor would be all the rage. But for some reason, it hasn't quite made the leap to the mainstream. Maybe it's the name, or maybe it's just too old-fashioned for today's palate. Either way, pot liquor is a delicious, nutritious throwback to a time when people didn't let anything go to waste. It's a dish that deserves a comeback, even if just for its health benefits. Families enduring the hardships of the Great Depression found sweet relief in a humble, comforting dessert they lovingly called Apple Brown Betty, a delicious testament to creativity born from necessity. This timeless dish turned inexpensive staples like stale breadcrumbs, apples, and sugar into a warm, irresistible treat, cleverly reducing waste and maximizing resources. Breadcrumbs, often destined for disposal, found new life layered between slices of budget-friendly apples, providing both affordability and accessibility to struggling households. Interestingly, historians suggest this sweet bake actually predates the Depression, tracing its roots to colonial America, but its popularity soared in the 1930s as cooks embraced inventive ways to stretch limited supplies. Some witty homemakers joked that Brown Betty was less of a recipe and more of a miracle, transforming yesterday's stale bread into today's delicious dessert. During this difficult time, homemakers rarely discarded bruised apples. Instead, skillfully hiding imperfections beneath cinnamon, nutmeg, and sugar, baking until golden brown and bubbling, effectively reducing waste and maximizing every ingredient. Now, if you want to talk about something that's really underrated, it would be criminal to not mention hardtack crackers with honey. These bad boys are about the next best thing when toast just seems like an unlikely fantasy. Also, once 6-0 start pouring that honey on them, they become a completely different meal. Now, hardtacks are always something people have associated with tough times because, being totally real with you, very few people like eating these unless they have to. Everyone would rather prefer some kind of biscuit or actual crackers or just anything to do with cornmeal. But hey, that's what the honey is supposed to be for, and that's honestly what helps it stand out as a perfectly light meal to get your day started. When you're low on money, you can't really pick and choose much, but you can definitely experiment carefully with what you do have. What some people would do is throw them in a skillet and gently fry them with lard for a bit of extra flavor, but that always seemed like it didn't work with the coarse nature of hardtack. What about you? If you had nothing to eat but a tin of these, how are you spicing it up? Rice and raisins were a really humble dish. When I talk about the psychological factor when it comes to eating, I'm referring to dishes like this. Rice on its own is perfectly edible, and it's something that people have eaten plain with nothing else for centuries. But eventually, that got old, didn't it? And even in the toughest of times, people needed a good snack, a sweet treat, something for the soul, a lot like how we do now. Their way of doing this on a budget? Take advantage of what Mother Nature's growing for you and throw in some raisins, which were really lovely because they were something that was abundant. You could either forage it, you could buy small boxes in bulk, and these were still relatively affordable, or government commodity drives and distributions would drop a few in your basket. The simplest iteration of this dish is just rice and raisins boiled in water, salt, and a pot. But if you want to take it a bit further, you can also mix in some milk, sugar, and butter, and elevate this dish into something that's a lot closer to a kind of rice-based custard or pudding. Kind of like kheer, from Southeast Asian cultures if you've ever had it. Minted lamb with jelly brings together the rich, robust flavors of roasted lamb with the refreshing zest of mint jelly, making it a quintessential British dish often featured during spring and Easter celebrations. The long-standing tradition of pairing mint with lamb dates back to medieval England, where the herb's sprightly flavor was used to complement the lamb's slight gaminess. The preparation typically involves roasting a leg or shoulder of lamb, seasoned liberally with salt, pepper, and often aromatic garlic and rosemary, ensuring the meat is juicy and tender. The mint jelly, a blend of mint, sugar, and vinegar, offers a sweet and tangy counterpoint that enhances the meat's deep flavors. This dish exemplifies the classic British culinary technique of marrying robust meat with a vibrant, acidic condiment to create a balanced and satisfying dining experience. Zucchini panzanella salad, an adaptation of the classic Italian bread salad, began to capture the attention of American food enthusiasts in the late 1990s. This version introduces zucchini and robust Italian bread, grilled to perfection, tossed with ripe tomatoes, red onions, and fresh basil, all dressed in a balsamic vinaigrette. The innovation lies not just in the ingredients, but in the method of preparation that emphasizes the grilling of vegetables and bread to enhance their flavors before combining them with the dressing. This approach not only maximizes the textures and flavors, but also aligns with a growing preference for grilled foods. The salad's popularity grew as it became synonymous with summer dining, often featured in outdoor meals and barbecues where a light yet satisfying dish was required. Speaking of strange meals, wait till you hear about hog maw. Now, this is a dish that's sure to impress your dinner guests. It's basically a pig's stomach stuffed with, well, who knows? Probably whatever was lying around. When you think of luxurious foods, a pig's stomach is probably the last thing that comes to mind. But back when wallets were tight, people had to make do with whatever they could find. It was found in American, soul food, Chinese, Mexican, Portuguese, Italian, and Vietnamese dishes. Hog maw was especially popular in Pennsylvania Dutch country, where nothing went to waste. Now, hog maw might sound a little fear factor-ish, but it was actually a way to stretch ingredients and make a filling meal for the whole family. It's like the ultimate meatloaf, if meatloaf came with an organ-based casing. These days, the idea of eating a pig's stomach might turn some people off, but back in the day, it was just another way to enjoy a meal. When Depression-era homemakers faced piles of leftover mashed potatoes, tossing them out wasn't even on the menu. Instead, they turned to the wonderfully versatile dish known as mashed potato pancakes. With affordability and accessibility in mind, this clever recipe utilized basic kitchen ingredients: leftover potatoes, flour, egg, and perhaps a sprinkle of onion or herbs if they were lucky. By frying these ingredients into golden brown pancakes, cooks skillfully transformed last night's side dish into today's main attraction, proving their ingenuity in reducing waste and maximizing resources. Beyond economy, potato pancakes became a Depression-era favorite for their satisfying crispness, turning humble leftovers into something you'd genuinely anticipate. Creativity born from necessity drove home cooks to experiment by folding in diced onions, stray ham bits, or even a dash of paprika, crafting variations that rivaled their breakfast cousins at fancy hotels. Amusingly, families soon realized these pancakes were so deliciously economical that purposely making extra mashed potatoes became standard practice. Before butter became the reigning toast topper, our frugal forebears embraced something a bit more rustic, like rendered animal fat smeared across toasted bread. Whether it was pork lard, beef tallow, or even goose fat, this golden spread was the original zero-waste culinary move. After frying up bacon or roasting meats, no one dared throw away the precious fat. Instead, they'd strain and save it, turning it into a savory, energy-packed breakfast boost. Some would sprinkle a pinch of salt, herbs, or if you were feeling fancy, even a touch of sugar to balance the richness. Back then, animal fat wasn't just a cooking byproduct. It was a prized resource, especially during lean times. For rural families and urban laborers alike, it provided essential calories to power through physically demanding days. But as refrigeration, vegetable oils, and dairy products became widespread, rendered fat slowly slid off the breakfast menu. Health trends also played a part. The low-fat craze of the late 20th century practically demonized it. Today, while foodies are rediscovering nose-to-tail cooking and chefs are reviving schmaltz and drippings for flavor-packed dishes, rendered fat on morning toast remains mostly a culinary ghost. Still, it's a fascinating reminder of a time when nothing went to waste, and breakfast was as much about survival as it was about satisfaction. Dandelion and bacon grease salad is an example of how Depression-era and 20th century foraging can actually lead to some really innovative recipes. This is something that's rooted in rural Midwestern culture, and this salad makes use of whatever is available in the wilds that day. One of the most common things you would ever find in these wilds was dandelion greens. They grew wild in all kinds of environments, roadsides, fields, and yards, and they were a really prized thing for the people. Most folks believed it was a natural remedy for a lot of things because it was believed to help with things like indigestion, inflammation, and strengthening your immune system. In subsistence farming areas and coal country, it was very common for families to teach their kids how to forage dandelion greens. Remember how I told you about the way bacon grease is used in a lot of these dishes? Yeah, so after frying the bacon, a small amount of bacon grease would be preserved and it would be used to flavor any kind of bland or plain dish like beans and cornbread and give it a bit of a savory edge. The rendered fat was really helpful to people because it also meant they didn't exactly need that much oil. Aspic glazed meatloaf is an example of mid-20th century American cuisine that combines traditional meatloaf with a gelatinous aspic topping. This dish reflects a period when aspic, a savory jelly made from clarified meat broths and gelatin, was popular in the culinary world for its ability to preserve and enhance the presentation of dishes. The meatloaf itself is typically prepared with ground meat, often a mix of beef, pork, and veal, seasoned with onions, garlic, breadcrumbs, and eggs to bind the mixture. After baking, the meatloaf is cooled and then glazed with a clear aspic made from beef or chicken stock that has been reduced and mixed with gelatin until set. This glaze not only adds a glossy, appetizing finish, but also introduces a subtle, savory flavor that complements the rich meatloaf. The aspic also helps to keep the meatloaf moist and flavorful by sealing in the juices. Cornbread-topped frijoles blends the heartiness of traditional Mexican beans with the comfort of Southern American cornbread, creating a casserole that is both nourishing and satisfying. This dish layers seasoned beans, often pintos or black beans, cooked with peppers, onions, and spices, topped with a layer of cornbread batter that bakes into a crusty topping. Originating from a blend of Native American and Mexican cooking techniques, the dish was adapted over time to include a variety of beans and sometimes meat, making each rendition a local specialty. The dish not only satisfies with its rich flavors and textures, but also serves as a practical one-dish meal that could easily feed a family or a gathering. Cornbread-topped frijoles became favored for its economical use of basic pantry staples and its ability to be prepared ahead of time, making it ideal for communal meals and family dinners. Chitlins, or chitterlings, are not for the faint of heart. We're talking pig intestines. Yep, you heard that right. These were cleaned, boiled, and sometimes fried up as a delicacy. Well, more like a necessity. Chitlins were a way to make sure no part of the animal went to waste, especially during lean times. They were also sometimes filled with forcemeat to make sausage, and intestines from other animals, such as cow, lamb, goose, and goat, were also used for making chitterlings. This strange delicacy was a traditional food of the southern United States that spread nationwide with the Black migration. These were taken off our dinner tables for better or worse. It's the kind of dish that makes you appreciate how far food has come and perhaps makes you grateful for modern refrigeration and food safety standards. Few Depression-era meals evoke nostalgia quite like the hearty duo known as beans and cornbread. In homes where budgets were stretched thin, pairing protein-packed beans with simple, inexpensive cornbread wasn't just tasty, it was brilliantly practical. Dried beans, easy to store, and remarkably affordable, found their match in cornbread, made with cheap cornmeal readily available in nearly every pantry. Here's where creativity born from necessity truly shined. Cooks would simmer beans slowly, sometimes flavoring them cleverly with bacon scraps or garden-grown herbs, turning limited supplies into deeply satisfying comfort food. Interestingly, cornbread had a dual role. Not only did it stretch a meal to feed extra mouths, but leftover cornbread was frequently repurposed, crumbled into soups, stews, or transformed into next-day stuffing. Talk about reducing waste and maximizing resources. Food historians have noted this humble pairing provided crucial nutrients too, ensuring struggling families stayed nourished despite financial hardships. Beans and cornbread even inspired a beloved jazz classic in the 1940s, capturing American hearts and stomachs in song, a sure sign of its enduring significance. Eggless pancakes. So the first time you hear that, you just automatically think that there's no real reason why these should exist because what's next? Brickless buildings? But really, eggless pancakes have been around for far longer than you would think. This is especially true for lean periods like the Great Depression or wartime rationing in the 1940s, and a lot of eggs back then were actually decently more expensive than people could afford, or they just weren't available because somebody who could afford them likely scooped most of them up. COVID-era bulk buying wasn't really an isolated event, I guess. Most recipes would essentially just rely on baking powder for the fluff and use some kind of oil or milk along with flour. Old-school versions, and I mean proper vintage recipes, would even include mashed bananas, vinegar, and some applesauce, and that's some proper veganism if you ask me. Eggless pancakes have largely faded into the background now, but they were definitely one of the most affordable meals our grandparents grew up with back in the day. Mock-fried chicken steak is a really interesting one because this actually makes use of so many things in creative ways to mimic the texture, taste, and overall feeling of fried chicken steak. Traditionally, the recipe calls for cheap cuts of meat, but in the Great Depression, people were even running with non-meat ingredients thanks to World War II rationing, which really put a massive hole in America's overall meat supply. In the 50s, too, home cooks brought this recipe back when they really needed to stretch a small amount of protein or use government food. So if you make this dish with ground meat or beef pork and shape it into a patty, mix it with breadcrumbs and cracker crumbs, and then douse it in seasoned flour or cracker crumbs again, then pan-fry it, you get a pretty decent imitation of chicken fried steak. You just have to be really careful with what kind of seasonings you use because it's also true that the kind of seasoning you go with decides how good of an imitation of a chicken fried steak this is. The most interesting part is probably the flour-based version, which was straight out of the Depression. People would make a fritter using flour, milk, and eggs to make something that resembled a steak, and this was seasoned and fried. There was no meat, but it was meant to imitate the breading, flour-y taste of the meal anyway. In all cases, it was a comfort meat, and a chunk of that comfort was that it kept your wallet in good health. Rabbit stew is a beloved traditional dish in various cultures, renowned for its hearty and comforting nature. This stew typically features tender pieces of rabbit slow-cooked with onions, garlic, and aromatic herbs like rosemary or thyme, which subtly enhance the mild flavor of the rabbit. Additional vegetables such as carrots, celery, and potatoes often join the mix, creating a robust, one-pot meal. The stewing liquid, usually wine or stock, enriches the dish, lending depth and complexity as it simmers. Rabbit meat, known for its leanness and delicacy, benefits greatly from the slow cooking process, becoming incredibly tender and infused with the rich flavors of the broth and vegetables. Rabbit stew is especially appreciated during the colder months or in rural settings where rabbit is a common game meat. Crab Louis salad, reputed to have originated on the West Coast in the early 1900s, is a luxurious ensemble of crab meat, hard-boiled eggs, tomatoes, asparagus, and iceberg lettuce, dressed in a creamy sauce made from mayonnaise and chili sauce. This salad is often linked with the dining rooms of San Francisco and Seattle, where it was served as a gourmet item in the early 20th century. The inclusion of Dungeness crab, a regional specialty, underscores the salad's connection to the Pacific Northwest's seafood bounty. Its enduring popularity was fueled by the dish's association with elegance and affluence, making it a prized feature on hotel and restaurant menus. Additionally, Crab Louis salad is a testament to the American culinary tradition of adopting and adapting regional ingredients to create dishes that become part of the national gastronomy. Potted meat is a canned meat product that was a staple in many households during tough times. Made from a mix of meats, including beef and pork, it's ground into a paste and seasoned. It's often used as a spread on crackers or bread, making it a quick and easy snack or meal component. Potted meat has a long shelf life, which makes it perfect for stocking pantries during uncertain times. It's not exactly gourmet fare, but it got the job done. However, in today's era of fresh whole foods, potted meat has fallen out of favor. It's the kind of thing you might find in a survival kit or on a camping trip, but not something you'd serve at a dinner party. Still, for those who grew up with it, potted meat holds a special place in the pantry of memories. While today's macaroni and cheese often comes in neon orange boxes, Depression-era cooks perfected their own homemade version, homemade macaroni and cheese, without a hint of processed powder in sight. In a time when boxed convenience foods were scarce or considered a luxury, resourceful homemakers created this comforting meal using inexpensive staples: macaroni pasta, milk, butter, and modest amounts of cheese. Interestingly, Thomas Jefferson himself is credited with introducing macaroni and cheese to America, having encountered it during his travels to Europe, though even he likely didn't imagine it becoming a Depression-era culinary hero. Its popularity during the 1930s arose not just from affordability and accessibility, but from its flexibility. Cooks creatively adapted the recipe, substituting scarce cheese with stretched white sauces or sneaking in leftovers to give the dish more bulk, clearly demonstrating creativity born from necessity. They joked that this dish was so adaptable, even cheese-free macaroni and cheese could somehow pass as a believable dinner option when times got especially tough. Bread scramble is pretty much one of those moments of sheer creativity, resourcefulness, and making the most out of things that just would never go together if you were adhering to common sense. It's a throw-together breakfast if I've ever seen one. I mean, you would honestly be hard-pressed to not call this survivalist cooking. It's exactly what you might think it is, too. Torn up pieces of bread that's either a day old at best or several at worst tossed up into a hot skillet. Add some butter and bacon grease, then scramble it up to high heaven with some eggs. People would typically add whatever scraps they could to make the meal stand out a bit more. They'd add leftover ham, onions, and different kinds of herbs, and flavor-wise, just think of it like a bread-based omelet. It actually soaks up a lot of the eggs and fat, so it's definitely a lot more flavorful than you would expect, and it gets the job done well enough from what is essentially a very impromptu breakfast. Probably end up with a nasty case of heartburn if you use this recipe regularly, though. Bacon ends and boiled greens are some of the most iconic meals you can get from the Depression. This is actually something that holds up just as well today. It was something we got from Southern survival cooking, and it was a dish that came out of long-standing culinary traditions surrounding boiled greens, a lot of hunger pangs, an incredible amount of resourcefulness, and being good with chopping meat. Bacon ends were the fatty parts that would be left over from a big slab of bacon. People would try to really keep these preserved and stored because they were laden with fat instead of a lot of meat. See, you were not supposed to actually eat these on their own, but simmer them so that they started to give off all that fat. This was amazing for flavoring stews, soups, and big pots of vegetables that were not really going to turn any heads on their own. Boiled greens have always been a massive cultural staple of the South, from collards and turnip greens to dandelion, mustard greens, and artichokes. If you're looking for a way to add some cheap and easy flavor to your dish without breaking the bank on flavorings, this is a pretty good way. Chicken Marengo holds a storied place in culinary history, famously prepared for Napoleon after the Battle of Marengo. This dish encapsulates the essence of victorious improvisation using local ingredients available at the time. Chicken Marengo starts with chicken pieces sautéed in olive oil, braised with onions, garlic, and tomatoes, enriched by a splash of white wine that deglazes the pan, forming a robust sauce. Later additions often include mushrooms, and traditionally, it was garnished with fried eggs and crayfish, though these are less common today. The slow simmering melds all the flavors beautifully, allowing the tomatoes to break down and create a rich, savory sauce that complements the tender chicken perfectly. This dish exemplifies French provincial cooking, utilizing straightforward techniques and local ingredients to produce a dish rich in history and flavor. Lunchables were launched in 1988 by Oscar Mayer, a brand owned by Kraft Foods, aimed at simplifying school lunch preparation for busy parents while appealing to children with fun, customizable options. Originally conceived during a company brainstorming session, the idea was to create a product that could use the brand's existing meat products in a novel way. The initial Lunchables kit featured crackers, processed cheese, and sliced meats, and could be assembled into miniature sandwiches, mimicking the action of building with blocks, which resonated well with children. Over the years, Lunchables expanded to include various themes like pizzas and tacos. The marketing campaigns for Lunchables focused heavily on fun and convenience, successfully capturing the interest of both parents and children. The packaging also evolved from simple plastic trays to more vibrant and engaging designs that featured games and trivia, enhancing the appeal. These kits not only changed the way food is packaged, but also influenced children's lunch habits by providing a fun and interactive way to enjoy their midday meal. Hoppin' John is a Southern classic made with black-eyed peas, rice, and pork, often flavored with onions, garlic, and spices. This dish was traditionally eaten on New Year's Day for good luck and prosperity, with the peas representing coins and the greens often served alongside representing dollars. Some recipes use ham hock, fatback, country sausage, or smoked turkey parts instead of bacon. A few use green peppers or vinegar and spices. Hoppin' John was a hearty, comforting dish that's perfect for feeding a crowd on a budget. It was a one-pot wonder that brings together simple ingredients in a delicious way. However, despite its tasty credentials, Hoppin' John hasn't quite made it to the top of the culinary charts. It's a dish steeped in tradition, but not one that has a big presence in today's trendy food scene. That said, it's still a beloved dish in the South and a tasty way to start the new year. In the Depression-era kitchen, stretching ingredients became a necessary art form, transforming humble ground beef into a flavorful comfort classic known as hamburger gravy on potatoes. Families embraced this hearty dish because ground beef, though modest, was accessible and affordable, especially when cooked with pantry staples like flour, water, and onions, creating a rich gravy that masked how little meat was actually used. Creativity born from necessity meant that cooks thickened gravy generously, ensuring it filled hungry bellies even when servings were modest. Interestingly, homemakers often intentionally prepared this gravy with more potatoes than beef, cleverly maximizing resources by relying on inexpensive starches to provide satisfying bulk. Historical accounts recall Depression-era parents jokingly referring to this gravy as luxury sauce, playfully elevating its status at the dinner table. Though in reality, luxury rarely appeared on their grocery lists. Additionally, leftover gravy would frequently return to the menu the next day, reheated or thickened, creatively reducing waste and reinventing yesterday's meal into something equally delicious the next night. This resourceful gravy and potatoes duo, considered by historians as an economical solution to nutritional challenges, became popular nationwide precisely because it turned ordinary pantry staples into something genuinely special. Now, crust coffee soak, on the other hand, is something that is actually wondrous. It's a take on stale bread crusts, and I mean the little leftover bits that almost nobody likes eating, and the idea here is actually pretty interesting. You take those crusts, soak them in hot coffee, sometimes a dash of sugar and a splash of milk, and you actually end up reviving the stale bread crusts completely. It was a very bare-bones dish, don't get me wrong, but it was also surprisingly comfortable if you grew up with it. Think about all the other things you can do with this too, like coffee-soaked bread pudding. Although, if we're being realistic, it's definitely just survival food at its core. You might still find old people today who remember their grandparents making this dish for them. But largely speaking, it wasn't that much of a hit, but it was amazing at saving money and keeping your appetite quiet for just a little while longer. Boiled bread dumplings were sometimes known as sinkers, mostly because they would just sit there as if they were sinking into the plate, but these were really as frugal as it would get. This was a dish that was made from old or stale bread, and all it took was fat, some eggs, or just an egg really, and bread, flour, and water. These dumplings were something you would see a lot in immigrant neighborhoods, especially the ones that were always around factories, industrial sites, construction sites, just heavy-duty neighborhoods where most laborers would live to cut down on commute. They started off as a way of just using stale bread so that it wouldn't go to waste. But the question is, how do you actually make dumplings at home like that? Well, the bread was just soaked in hot water, and the flour was mixed in so that it would hold. If an egg wasn't there, it would be a bit looser of a dish, but the dough would still be thickened, and the mixture would just need to be formed into rough balls. The dumplings were then simmered and boiled, and there you had it. Each immigrant community had its own different variation of this too. German, Eastern European, and Czech communities all had their own definition of what making this should be like. Anchovy butter steaks are a bold culinary creation, blending the umami depth of anchovies with the rich flavors of succulent steak. Popularized in mid-20th century America, this dish caters to those who appreciate daring flavor combinations. The steak, usually a marbled ribeye or sirloin, is seasoned simply and seared to perfection. The anchovy butter, a mixture of softened butter, finely minced anchovies, garlic, and occasionally a hint of lemon zest or herbs, is then slathered over the hot steak. This compound butter melts into the steak, infusing it with salty and intense anchovy flavors that enhance the natural beefiness. Here, the assertive flavor of anchovies perfectly accentuates the steak's luxurious richness, crafting a dining experience rich in both taste and elegance. Lentil soup's place in the American culinary landscape was solidified as nutritional awareness rose in the 1980s. This humble soup, made from lentils simmered with carrots, celery, onions, and a medley of spices, became prized not only for its comforting warmth, but also for its nutritional powerhouse status, offering high protein and fiber content. The simplicity of its ingredients and the one-pot cooking method appealed to those seeking wholesome, minimal-effort meals. Additionally, lentil soup's adaptability to incorporate various spices and additional vegetables allowed it to remain a favorite among those experimenting with global cuisines, easily taking on flavors from different culinary traditions. Another item on this list is head cheese. Don't let the name fool you. There's no cheese in head cheese. Instead, it's a terrine or meat jelly made from the flesh of a pig or calf's head. Sounds appetizing, right? Variations of head cheese exist throughout Europe and elsewhere, with differences in preparation and ingredients. A version pickled with vinegar is known as sauce. Head cheese was a way to use every part of the animal, especially during times when food was scarce. It's a dish that's rich in flavor and history, but not exactly a crowd pleaser in modern times. While you might still find it in some specialty delis, it's not the kind of thing you'd bring to a potluck without a disclaimer. During the Depression, families looking to feed hungry mouths often turned breakfast into dinner, a practice that brought hash browns and eggs into regular rotation at evening meals. The brilliance of this dish lay in its simplicity, leveraging affordability and accessibility by combining humble potatoes and eggs, both readily available and inexpensive staples. Shredding potatoes into crispy hash browns was not only an inventive solution for stretching pantry supplies, but also a clever way of reducing waste and maximizing resources, as even slightly soft or sprouting potatoes could still shine when grated and fried crisp. Interestingly, during the 1930s, eggs became an essential dietary staple due to their relative affordability compared to meat, providing crucial protein without straining tight household budgets. Creative Depression-era cooks, never short on innovation, occasionally mixed in leftover bits of ham or diced vegetables into the hash browns, turning yesterday's scraps into today's flavorful feast. If your leftovers happen to be potatoes, mashed or otherwise, then potato cakes are your hero for today's Saturday dinner. Potato cakes are the ultimate leftover glow-up, and they're a fine example of how putting a little bit of faith, time, and creativity into what you think is nothing that's special can actually result in a killer dish. Potato cakes are made from mashed potatoes that have been mixed with a generous bit of flour, egg, and then shaped into patties until they're golden brown. Just think of them like hash browns, or at least like a distant but more nostalgic and comfier cousin of hash browns. The flavor is what you would expect, but it's honestly more buttery than you would think too. You're really going to have the time of your life if your original mashed potatoes that are left over were made with cream or garlic mixed in, but even if they weren't, that's always a step you can add later. Potato cakes were the gift of several immigrant communities that were putting down roots during the 1800s and 1900s. This is a dish that's been shared among Irish, German, and Polish families, so everybody has their own take on it, and I know boxed mashed potatoes and freezer meals are what everyone goes for today. But this still beats all of that. Bread pudding with water sauce is about as simplistic as it comes. This is a dish that people didn't even really put any thought into. It was just a way for them to repurpose resources that were about to spoil and go to waste. This is really something you never want happening in the Depression because it was a sign that you were just not handling your pantry properly. Back then, people religiously followed a mindset of not wasting anything, even the grease and drippings from bacon. and you'll find a dish or two made out of that later on in this video too. Back to bread pudding with water sauce. So, you might have heard of bread pudding before, but what really is water sauce? I mean, it sounds like a bastardized version of sparkling water when you first hear it. It's actually just a modest attempt at making a thickened sauce out of just water, because most of the time people were not working with any kind of legitimate thickener or enough ingredients to make a proper sauce, so they had to settle for whatever they could come up with to make stale bread more refreshing. The bread pudding in question is essentially just stale, almost moldy bread soaked in sweetened water, and most of the time, the sweetening was with things like maple syrup. Even this is something people began to tap out of maple trees whenever they could because they couldn't spend the extra cents. Still, we have a lot more leverage nowadays, so you can probably actually make a decent bread pudding-based sauce dish with enough ingredients and guidance, but the next time you really need to finish some bread, you know what to make. Coq au vin stands out as a rich, soul-warming dish that is achieved through a slow cooking process that melds the flavors of chicken and wine thoroughly. Traditionally used to soften tough roosters, modern recipes often utilize chicken, marinated, and then braised in wine, typically red, along with mushrooms, onions, garlic, and a bouquet garni. Initially, the chicken is seared until golden, then simmered slowly with lardons, which infuse a smoky depth. This technique showcases French braising skills, starting with a high sear followed by a gentle, prolonged cooking in a covered pot, allowing the intricate flavors to blend and enhance the meat. The selection of wine is pivotal, forming a flavorful sauce base that deeply seasons the chicken, transforming it into a hearty, deeply satisfying stew that exemplifies rustic yet refined French cooking. The taco salad, which emerged as a popular dish in American cuisine in the 1960s, is a notable example of Tex-Mex culinary fusion. The typical taco salad starts with a crunchy tortilla bowl filled with lettuce, seasoned ground beef, shredded cheese, diced tomatoes, and black olives, finished with dollops of sour cream and salsa. This dish illustrates the adaptability of Mexican cuisine to American tastes, incorporating more cheese and sour cream than traditional Mexican salads. Taco salads became particularly popular in the 1980s, often served at gatherings and potlucks due to their customizable nature, which allowed guests to tailor the toppings to their preferences. Taco salad's popularity also coincided with a growing interest in more casual dining experiences at home, where families and friends could interact in more relaxed settings. So, cornmeal mush was the humble, comforting porridge made from, surprise, cornmeal. It became all the rage in the eastern and southeastern United States, and people in the Midwestern states ate it with maple syrup or molasses. In Eastern Europe, milk was poured over the meal once served and cooled down, rather than being boiled in it. Imagine a bowl of yellow, gluey goop that your grandma would call comfort food. Don't get me wrong, I love a good, hearty bowl of oatmeal, but cornmeal mush? That's a whole different level of bland. Apparently, people used to fry it up for breakfast. I mean, I guess it's a way to add some crunch to your mushy morning meal. This dish was a staple in many households during hard times because it was cheap, filling, and versatile. However, in today's world of avocado toast and acai bowls, cornmeal mush just doesn't stand a chance. When fresh meat vanished from dinner tables during the Great Depression, clever home cooks across America transformed simple staples into meals that were both satisfying and surprisingly sophisticated. One dish that embodied this culinary ingenuity was spaghetti with butter and garlic, a modest yet flavorful creation championed for its affordability and accessibility. Pasta was cheap, garlic bulbs grew easily in backyard gardens, and butter was often the only indulgence that squeezed through tight household budgets, making this meal the perfect ally during financial hardship. But here's a little-known historical gem. Many immigrant families introduced this garlic-infused comfort using recipes carried from European homelands and creatively adapted due to economic necessity. Leftover spaghetti was often intentionally cooked in larger batches to reuse the next day, thereby cleverly reducing waste and maximizing resources. Housewives humorously called it the gourmet dish without the gourmet budget, noting that despite its humble ingredients, it carried an air of Mediterranean flair. Hot water fried cornmeal cakes are an old-school Southern staple that don't really get even half the love and attention they should these days. I just want you to visualize a crispy, golden brown cornmeal cake with the most incandescent exterior you've ever seen, and then a tender, soft center that just leaves you wanting more and more. But it's natural, and even good, to get curious. And when you hear hot water fried anything, your first instinct is to immediately go like, wait, what? And I really wouldn't blame you. The practice of making cornmeal cakes this way is something that actually goes back several centuries, right back to the enslaved African Americans in the South who were making the first versions of these. Without access to proper feed, not even leavening, they found a way to make do with just cornmeal and water, and these were also known by a much more popular name, hoe cakes. Now, in the end, they started to fall out of everyone's go-to cooking preferences, but I think cornmeal cakes have one more comeback in them, despite it all. Boiled onion dinners are essentially exactly what they sound like. The idea here was to take an entire onion, use some salt and pepper, and, well, just get to it. This isn't really something that I think could apply at all today to our world or lifestyle anymore, but if you feel differently or better yet, have different experiences surrounding this, please mention them in the comments. I'm so curious about what this even feels like afterward. This is very telling of the kind of lifestyles people were having before the Depression ended. It was something that was really common in early American frontier households, especially the ones from the 18th and 19th centuries. Onions back then used to be equivalent to treasure because of how well they were stored, and they also were seen as a wonderful flavoring ingredient. Then, in Appalachia and different parts of the South, onions were such a common crop that they became a regular at dinners. It became standard practice to boil whole onions and have them together with some cornbread, of course. Any meat would help, but it was rarely given. Interestingly enough, from what I've read, the onion is supposed to get sweeter. But that's also a little strange because you just don't associate onions with that kind of flavor, right? Pork belly with cracklings is celebrated for its luxurious flavors and contrasting textures derived from the rich layers of meat and fat found in pork belly. The preparation process starts with scoring the skin and massaging it with a blend of salt, pepper, and aromatic herbs or spices to infuse flavor. The meat is slow roasted at a low temperature to render the fat and tenderize the meat, followed by a blast of high heat to crisp the skin into cracklings. This approach ensures the pork belly stays succulent, while the outer skin turns deliciously crisp. Often served sliced thickly and accompanied by applesauce or a cider reduction, this dish perfectly pairs the pork's richness with a touch of sweet acidity. The allure of pork belly with cracklings lies in the depth of its flavors and the satisfying interplay of tender meat with crispy skin. The introduction of Mexican lasagna in the 1980s showcased the seamless integration of Mexican flavors into traditional Italian architecture. This layered delight swaps out standard lasagna noodles for tortillas and the usual marinara for a zesty salsa, layering ground beef seasoned with taco spices, refried beans, and plenty of cheese. Each oven-baked layer melds into a textural symphony that's both familiar and novel. This dish not only catered to the growing American appetite for global flavors, but also provided a fun, festive twist on the classic lasagna, making it a favored choice at dinner parties and family nights. Its preparation, often involving family members in the assembly process, turned cooking into an interactive experience, further solidifying its popularity. Pickled pig's feet are exactly what they sound like: pig feet that have been pickled in a vinegar solution with spices. This dish was popular in the South and among certain ethnic groups, offering a tangy, chewy treat that was often eaten as a snack or side dish. The process of pickling preserved the pig's feet, making them a practical choice in times before refrigeration. The vinegar and spices added a punch of flavor that helped mask the natural taste of the feet. Today, pickled pig's feet are more of a novelty than a common food item. They might still be found in some specialty stores, but they're far from a mainstream snack. It's a dish that has mostly fallen out of favor, but for those who enjoy it, it's a taste of nostalgia. So, at a time when expensive ingredients rarely made it past grocery lists, Depression-era cooks took humble foods and transformed them into flavorful comforts. One classic that emerged from these kitchen experiments was the egg sandwich with mayonnaise. A dish so simple yet so satisfying it became a household staple. Eggs offered affordable protein for struggling families, while mayonnaise, commercially mass-produced since the 1920s, was surprisingly accessible even on modest budgets. Interestingly, mayonnaise itself soared in popularity during the Depression because its creamy texture and tanginess helped mask the blandness of otherwise sparse meals. This sandwich demonstrated creativity born from necessity, as many families stretched 1 or 2 eggs across several sandwiches by mixing them generously with mayo, thus cleverly reducing waste and maximizing resources. Homemakers would joke that mayo held Depression cooking together better than glue, and honestly, given the circumstances, they might have been right. Beyond thriftiness, eggs became popular due to their versatility. Leftovers from breakfast could easily reappear for lunch, tucked between slices of bread, often toasted to disguise staleness. Lard biscuits are pretty much the heroes of old-school baking. If you actually look at it from a historical lens, these unapologetically flavorful biscuits have kept way more bellies full than something like turnips. No, but really, lard biscuits have been a generational safety net for when a hunger pang is about to turn a bad day into a bad week. Lard biscuits were the go-to in Southern kitchens for the longest time, even before butter became a staple ingredient in the area. Folks would keep tins of drippings on the stove, but most of the lard was preserved, not because people had to ration it or because they were running awfully short, but because they just liked it that much. Lard biscuits are something you don't see around anymore, but during several of the past few centuries, as well as notable periods like the Great Depression and the World Wars, lard biscuits were man's best friends. Hot cornbread is a historically significant variation of cornbread. Why? It's because it was so common in many disadvantaged communities in the South. Poor Black communities and even white communities in towns and rural outskirts from the 19th to the 20th century would try to get through the week just by lasting on this. As far as keeping it low-key is concerned, this minimalistic dish is definitely the way to go, and cornmeal, boiling water, and salt is all you need. It doesn't need eggs, milk, or wheat flour, it doesn't need any kind of oven, and it also doesn't really feel like a meal either. A small scoop of cornmeal was enough to make a lot of patties, yeah, but you needed a decent amount of sides to make sure it was actually a fulfilling dish, like beans, greens, and potatoes would help a lot. Also, in Black Southern communities, hot water cornbread was one of their core recipes. A real pillar of the community, and each different variation of cornbread was passed down from generation to generation, usually just by observation, word of mouth, or having someone drill the lesson into your head. Peach chicken became popular in the 1970s, aligning with an American trend of integrating fruit into savory dishes. This recipe combines the natural sweetness of peaches with the savory depth of chicken, creating a delightful contrast. Browned chicken pieces are simmered with fresh or canned peaches, with ginger and cinnamon adding a layer of spice that complements the sweetness. Additional peach preserves or syrup can be added to enrich the sauce, deepening the dish's flavor profile. A splash of bourbon or brandy is sometimes included, lending a smoky nuance. The sauce is typically thickened with a cornstarch slurry, producing a glossy finish that adheres beautifully to the chicken. This dish illustrates the versatility of chicken as a canvas for flavor, adeptly marrying the sweet with the savory in a uniquely American culinary experiment. Known affectionately as a hot dish in the Midwest, the tater tot casserole is a quintessential example of American comfort food. It was popularized in the 1950s as a convenient way to create a hearty meal with minimal ingredients. The casserole consists of a base layer of ground beef seasoned with onions, a binder of condensed mushroom or chicken soup, a layer of canned or frozen vegetables, and a top layer of crisp tater tots. As it bakes, the tater tots form a golden crust, providing a crunchy contrast to the creamy, savory mixture below. The casserole's popularity also demonstrates the post-war American innovation in using processed and prepackaged foods to save time in the kitchen, a trend that mirrored the nation's growing emphasis on convenience and efficiency in everyday life. Potted huff is a dish made from the meat of the shin of a cow or pig, cooked and pressed into a pot with its own jelly-like juices. It's similar to head cheese but focuses on a specific part of the animal. This dish was often seasoned and served cold, sliced up with bread or pickles. Back in the day, potted hoof was a way to make use of tougher cuts of meat that needed slow cooking to become tender. It was a popular dish among working-class families in the UK and the US, providing a hearty, protein-rich meal. Nowadays, potted hoof has largely disappeared from the culinary scene, replaced by more refined meat products. It's a dish that hasn't stood the test of time, but it still offers a glimpse into the resourceful cooking of past generations. Depression-era cooks knew a thing or two about making meals stretch, so it's no surprise that biscuits and gravy rose from humble country kitchens to iconic comfort food status. With meat scarce and household budgets stretched thinner than grandma's rolling pin dough, home cooks cleverly transformed simple ingredients into dishes that satisfied entire families. The beauty of biscuits and gravy rested in their remarkable affordability and accessibility. Flour, milk, shortening, and perhaps leftover sausage drippings became the foundation of this hearty meal. In some homes, the gravy contained just a whisper of meat, leading folks to joke that their gravy was vegetarian by accident. Creativity born from necessity truly shined here as cooks thickened gravy with flour and milk, turning meager supplies into something genuinely craveable. To further maximize resources, biscuits were often intentionally baked in excess, allowing stale leftovers to be reheated, crumbled into soups, or repurposed in savory casseroles later that week. Boiled barley porridge is one of those breakfasts that just feels like a pat on the back from a mentor, a hug from your best friend, or a call from your grandparents asking you to come over and try some of that breakfast you always love. It's also something that's built to last you at least until the middle of the day. You make boiled barley porridge by simmering hulled or pearl barley into water and milk, and then you get a soft, creamy texture that almost melts in your mouth. Flavor-wise, though, it's pretty nutty and kind of similar to oatmeal. You get a chewer bite and a bit more earthiness out of this, but it soaks up almost any kind of syrup or liquid you throw at it, as well as spices. That's a big part of why this dish is as flavorful as it is. We're talking about some serious ancient history when we discuss its origins, though, like this is the kind of thing that goes way further back, to the times of the Romans and medieval peasants. In the United States, it's something that was popular first in rural areas and immigrant homes, but each country has its own history with barley. One of the next inventive things people came up with during really hard times was potato peel soup. This is about as bare bones as it sounds because it's really just seasoned water that's been made into a makeshift broth with potato peels in there. Despite this, let me tell you a little about why this is a pretty good dish. It's because it keeps you full for an incredible amount of time. Have you ever had oatmeal and felt incredibly full afterward? For like a surprisingly long amount of time? This is because oatmeal has a substantial amount of fiber in it, and potatoes are pretty much the same. Half their fiber content comes from the peel itself, actually. This is what makes potato peel soup such a good dish for when you don't really have any kind of money. It sustains you and really helps keep your appetite down, which is sad in retrospect because you have to be keeping your hunger down, but these days we have to do that pretty often. It helps to have dishes that are really good with fiber because they have this nice effect of you wanting less food, and thus you have more money at the end of the day. Beef bourguignon is a cornerstone from Burgundy, involving marinated and slow-cooked beef chunks, typically tougher cuts like chuck, bathed in red wine, usually Burgundy, to tenderize the meat over several hours. This hearty stew is fortified with onions, garlic, and carrots, and enhanced with sautéed mushrooms and crisp lardons. Historically, this method likely evolved as a means to tenderize and enrich less desirable cuts of meat. The stew develops a rich, deep umami flavor from the Maillard reaction, which occurs as the beef browns, and the complex flavors intensify as the wine slowly melds with the herbs and vegetables. The slow cooking process not only enriches the stew's flavor, but also fills the kitchen with an inviting aromatic warmth, making beef bourguignon synonymous with comforting, rich French culinary tradition. This festive dish, emerging in American culinary circles in the mid-20th century, cleverly combines the contrasting flavors of sweet pineapple and savory cheese. The pineapple cheese ball consists of cream cheese enriched with finely chopped pineapple, green peppers, and sometimes added ham or pecans, rolled into a ball and coated with crushed nuts. The dish captures the post-war American enthusiasm for novel flavor combinations and party foods that could double as conversation starters. Its popularity at social events can be attributed to both its taste and its decorative appearance, which made it a visually appealing centerpiece on buffet tables. The pineapple cheese ball also illustrates the period's innovation in using canned ingredients, which were celebrated for their convenience and year-round availability, allowing hosts to whip up impressive treats without extensive preparation. When cabbage was plentiful but budgets were anything but, Depression-era cooks took kitchen creativity to a whole new level by pairing shredded cabbage with noodles, creating a hearty, inexpensive classic known as fried cabbage and noodles. Historically, this dish traces back to Central and Eastern European immigrants who brought their culinary traditions to America. But it surged in popularity during the 1930s, when affordability and accessibility mattered most. Resourceful cooks realized that cabbage, plentiful and hearty, could stretch further when paired with pasta, transforming two humble ingredients into a satisfying meal. And here's a surprising twist. Many homemakers would cleverly fry cabbage in bacon drippings or leftover meat fat saved from previous dinners, masterfully reducing waste and maximizing resources. Families often joked that this dish had a magical ability to multiply, like those mismatched socks in the laundry basket. It seemed there was always more left over than initially prepared. Fried until golden, cabbage turned sweet and slightly caramelized, perfectly balancing the blandness of boiled noodles. So, a peanut butter molasses sandwich is pretty much as good as it gets. It's old-school lunchbox energy, and it's sticky, sweet, and salty. It's pretty much made to power you through the day on a mostly low-key budget, and it's also exactly what it sounds like. This is a very hearty smear of peanut butter, and it's usually something that's layered with a drizzle of molasses on plain sandwich bread. Molasses tend to add this really deep, smoky sweetness that's a lot more intense than any kind of honey or jelly, and the peanut butter essentially rings the salt and fat. This makes it really well balanced and filling, and the sandwich shows up a lot more during times when economic crises were your average Tuesday. I'm talking about periods like the Depression and the middle part of the 1940s, where even an egg was not really promised to you. This was especially true for people in working-class homes. Peanut butter was something that people loved because it was really heavy in protein and dense, and it would work more often than not with molasses. The boldness and earthy sweetness of molasses actually bounced off really well with the richness of the peanut butter, and it's not a light sandwich at all. Just the way corned beef hash was revolutionary because it made beef so available, canned tomato sauce was the same. Macaroni and tomatoes is an example of how people received the introduction of canned food with a lot of excitement. I mean, if you were told that you didn't have to spend half an hour in the kitchen beating up sticky tomatoes to make a paste, and you could just go buy one for a few cents, wouldn't you be happy? Plus, it was an excuse to get out of the house. At least we have grocery store escapes in common. We also have macaroni and tomatoes in common, mostly because just like bacon ends and boiled greens, this is a dish that would hold up perfectly in today's culinary climate. Boiled elbow macaroni would be mixed with canned or fresh tomatoes or tomato paste, finished with just a bit of grease, lard, or butter, and then seasoned with salt and pepper. While the flavor of the dish was mostly the same, what was really interesting was the way its texture could change so wildly. This could be made like a stew, thick and velvety, or it could be made like a soup, creamy and slightly thin, but overall thick. People definitely took advantage of that and changed it up as much as they could to keep things fresh. Duck à l'orange marries the deep, rich flavors of duck with the sharp zestiness of oranges, a culinary duo dating back to the Renaissance, though it gained popularity in Paris in the early 20th century. This classic dish features roasted duck with a skin crisped to perfection, paired with a sweet and tangy orange sauce made from fresh orange juice, sugar, vinegar, and sometimes Grand Marnier. To perfect duck à l'orange, meticulous attention is paid to rendering the fat from the duck skin, ensuring it crisps up beautifully to contrast with the juicy meat beneath. The sauce is usually prepared separately and reduced to a luscious syrup, then drizzled over the duck just before serving to preserve its bold, vibrant flavors. This dish masterfully balances the rich, natural fat of the duck with the bright, acidic notes of citrus, showcasing refined culinary techniques. In kitchens where meat vanished quicker than paychecks, homemakers of the Great Depression era discovered a creative, albeit eye-watering solution for lunchtime: onion sandwiches. This modest sandwich leveraged affordability and accessibility since onions and bread were inexpensive staples almost always within reach, offering families something flavorful without stretching the grocery budget. Slices of fresh onions nestled between generously buttered bread, sometimes enhanced with mustard or mayonnaise, became surprisingly popular, though it's safe to say breath mints probably weren't Depression-era priorities. Despite jokes that onion sandwiches kept romantic interests socially distant long before it was popular, this creative culinary strategy arose from genuine necessity. Families embraced onions not only for flavor, but because they contained vitamin C, a nutrient scarce when fresh produce was limited. Historically fascinating is that this sandwich wasn't merely the invention of struggling Americans. Immigrants from Eastern Europe had long enjoyed onion sandwiches, demonstrating that sometimes necessity sparks international culinary inspiration. Hardtack might sound like a pirate snack, and honestly, you wouldn't be wrong. This rock-hard cracker was a staple for soldiers, sailors, and settlers alike. Anyone who needed food that could last months or even years. Made simply from flour and water, hardtack was famously tough to chew, earning nicknames like tooth duller and molar breaker. But here's where things got clever. To make this bland biscuit remotely edible, people would soak it in water, milk, or even coffee to soften it up. Now add a generous smear of honey or syrup, and suddenly you've got a sweet treat that feels like a luxury in hard times. Back in the day, honey was nature's candy, and drizzling it over softened hardtack transformed survival food into a breakfast comfort. So why did it disappear? Well, once fresher options and modern preservation methods came along, hardtack lost its charm. Plus, people today aren't exactly thrilled about eating something that requires pre-soaking unless it's oatmeal. Supermarkets brimming with fluffy pastries and freshly baked bread have pushed this once practical dish into just a figment of history. So, a sliced onion and mayonnaise sandwich was actually a proper friend to people back then. This meal still felt like pre-crisis times in the 20th century, when you could come home expecting a sandwich every day. Onions were again preferred so heavily because of how easy they were to grow, how cheap they were to buy, how well they survived in most climates, and the immense amount of variety that they had. A few slices of onions, caramelized, with beautiful mayonnaise was literally heaven to people back then. It's also just like diet-friendly food now. This is something that really takes no money, effort, time, or resources. Well, besides 2 slices of bread and some onions to make, and gives you a filling sandwich in return, which is more than most can say for a lot of meals that came from the toughest times in the 20th century. It was definitely peasant food, but it was still something that tasted good, which was really all somebody wants when they're in a bad spot. Ham and cheese quiche, which gained prominence in American kitchens in the 1970s, is a refined yet simple dish, originating from French cuisine but fully embraced by American bakers. This savory pie combines a flaky pastry crust with a luscious filling of eggs, cream, diced ham, and shredded cheese, often Swiss or cheddar for extra flavor. The quiche is baked until the egg mixture sets into a creamy custard, perfect for slicing. It became popular not just for its delicious taste, but for its adaptability to various dining occasions, from brunches to dinner parties. The dish's versatility extends to the kitchen, where variations might include different types of meat, vegetables, or cheeses, depending on the cook's preference or the ingredients on hand. Moreover, the preparation of quiche contributed to its status as a dish that could be dressed up for guests or scaled down for a simple family meal. Facing lean cupboards and even leaner wallets, Depression-era cooks perfected the skill of turning ordinary ingredients into comforting meals, like the ever-reliable tomato soup with saltines. More than just canned tomatoes and crackers, This simple dish captured a culinary snapshot of the era, reflecting affordability and accessibility at their finest. Families stretched cans of tomato soup with extra water or milk, cleverly expanding each portion while sneaking in some nutrition. Saltines, which hit grocery shelves as early as the late 1800s, were inexpensive pantry essentials and cleverly used by home cooks to add bulk and texture. Interestingly, tomato soup gained notable popularity in America during the early 20th century, especially after Campbell's introduced their condensed version in 1897, just in time for folks to discover that thinning soup was easier than thickening wallets. Reducing waste and maximizing resources was key, with homemakers crumbling stale saltines into soups to prevent waste, often jokingly calling it croutons for the budget-conscious. Some inventive cooks even combined leftover vegetables or milk into the tomato base, demonstrating creativity born purely from necessity. Which Depression-era meal should we bring back to our tables today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe so we can rediscover these forgotten survival recipes together.